This week on BSD Now, it's time to sit down and have a chat with Justin Sherrill of the DragonflyBSD project about their brand new 3.6 release. Later on, we'll also be showing you a huge tutorial that's been baking for over a month now on how to build an OpenBSD router that'll pretty much destroy any consumer router on the market. And of course, there's going to be lots of news to get caught up on as well. So sit back and enjoy some BSD Now, the place to be, SD. BSD Now, episode 11, The Gateway Drug, recorded November the 13th of 2013. Hi, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
Good to have you with us all today, folks. We got a great show coming, lots of good news, a good tutorial, and of course a great interview we recorded the other night. But first, let's get right into the headlines. First up, we have OpenSSH news. So I know we'd kind of previewed this a little bit before, Alan, but what came out just recently?
It's just the next version of OpenSSH 6.4,
Okay.
And it includes a fix for a memory corruption bug that could be triggered when rekeying the AES GCM cipher, which could allow someone who actually has an account on your server and could log in, could trigger an exploit, basically. So they got that fixed. So it's available now, and you can download that.
Sure.
It's basically just a minor update over 6.3, but I think it's in the ports tree already. Yes, it is. So if you want to upgrade from... In FreeBSD, the base version is still 5 point something, right? I think so.
So it wasn't vulnerable in this case.
But if you want the newer features in 6.x, you can install it from ports. It's under security/OpenSSH-portable. I use it because I can compile it with the Nun cipher to transfer ZFS snapshots really fast over the internet. And so I updated all of mine because they were all 6.3 and now they're 6.4p1.
Okay. Oh, very cool. Yeah, that's how we rsync all our data up to you guys too. No point in encrypting that. It's all public information.
Exactly. Might as well save the CPU cycles.
Definitely. So, okay, well, that's really cool. So good to know. If you guys, anybody's running the old version out there from the ports tree, please be aware you need to update that. That's a possible bad bug you don't want to leave on your system.
We should do a tutorial sometime in the future about like VU XML and port audit or something like that.
Yeah. How to keep your system secure and keep track of all these things. Yeah, because it's kind of hard if you're new to the community to know exactly where to look and which things, like, for example, some of the automated emails that run in FreeBSD and tell you, oh, this package is vulnerable, whatever. Be kind of cool to do an intro to that. But okay, that's for another show, though. We'll get to that. But next up, we have our next entry in the Port Manager interview series, getting to know your Port Manager lurkers. So this time they chatted with Matthew Arnold of the Port Manager lurkers we had mentioned previous week. There was a lot of good questions in here. He answers stuff on why he uses BSD to, of course, what he had for breakfast, because you really want to know that right now. But we have all the links in the show notes, so definitely go take a look. There's going to be another one since it's been released, looks like, with Anton Broden, who is Anton at freebsd.org. So definitely some cool information there. Get to know the team, the people responsible for your ports tree.
Yeah, so, he's mentions that around 2000, 2001, he needed something to replace a Linux firewall. And he's from France, and some other people from France were advocating FreeBSD, so he went that way and started using IP filter. He was pleased with that, and over time he's basically been running a FreeBSD shop for 10 years now.
That's the way a lot of us start. Yep. Just one small scratch we got to, or itch we got to scratch, so to speak, and next thing you know, you're sucked in. You never leave. A little like Hotel California here in that way, right?
Yep. And he says his most embarrassing moment was earlier this year when he added Perl 5.18 to the ports tree and broke the ports tree.
Oh, nice. I get a little worried anytime I see Perl getting bumped in the ports tree, to tell you the truth. Yeah, Perl, Python, there's just a few of those.
Perl's not bad. The really bad one is PHP because they have... The ports aren't named for the version like in Perl, right? Perl, there's like 5.14, 5.16, and 5.18. With PHP, there's PHP 5.2, 5.3, 5, which used to be 5.3 and is now 5.4, and then PHP 5.5. And 5.3 is going to go away soon, and 5.2 is already gone. So all of my machines that have PHP 5 installed, which is 5.4, are all of a sudden going to become 5.5. Or, you know, all the ones that have 5.3 installed are going to be like, sorry, we can't update because that package doesn't exist anymore. Luckily, the package tool makes it a little easier now with the set command to change the origin and update stuff. But
it is.
Yeah, it gets
that would always fun. A couple web servers I've run, that always scares me when you update PHP and it's like, oh, this module's not been updated. I need to go fix that.
Well, or, you know, part of it's PHP's fault. All of a sudden, WordPress doesn't work in this version, or this plugin doesn't work in that version, and you know, when you're doing other people's websites and they have old stuff, it's like, well, you know, we'd really like to be using the newest version of PHP for all the cool stuff that I want to do. Yeah. But I'm being held back by the fact that your website runs really old code.
Like an ancient Joomla install or something. Exactly. Yeah, I've been there too. Okay, next up, we got a Fuse support in OpenBSD. So I guess we did talk a little bit about this earlier, but Fuse was recently added to OpenBSD. Now the guys from the OpenBSD journal have tracked down a little bit more information about it, and it looks like this version's released under an ISC license. So how similar to that is to the BSD license?
It's pretty similar. I think everything in OpenBSD is under that license. They don't actually use the BSD license. It's kind of funny.
Well, oh, interesting tidbit. I didn't know that.
But it's very similar.
Looks like that's going to be an OpenBSD 5.5, releasing a little less than 6 months from now. So put that on the coming soon. And it'll allow things finally like SSHFS to work out of box in OpenBSD, which is very cool. Yeah, that's some neat functionality.
I wonder if this is related at all to the in-kernel Fuse that FreeBSD just got.
You know, that's a good question. I wonder if they're connected or sharing code or how that works. Yeah. But I have to look into that. Something
also, another interesting project a friend of mine worked on, and it has a working version now of backporting that kernel Fuse to FreeBSD 9.
Oh, okay. Are there enough people asking for the Fuse implementation on 9?
Well, it sure beats the kernel module one that crashes all the time. Right?
Sure.
You know, if it's actually stable, it'd be useful. But everybody switched to 10.
Is the new one in kernel stable? Is that what I'm hearing?
On 10, it seems to be. I've been using it on 10, right? You use it on 10,
I just remember. Yeah, I am briefly. I haven't touched it a whole lot. I just remember years ago playing with Fuse, and it was like, and it crashed, and it crashed. Yeah. But all right, well, that's cool. I'll have to definitely play around with that a little bit more with 10 now. Okay, next we also have a new cool automated submission of kernel panic reports for FreeBSD. This is actually something that really excites me. This is something we've needed for a long time. But thank you to Colin Percival, who wrote this new utility. Basically, in a nutshell, what it's going to do for you is when you have a kernel panic on the system, it's going to save some information about that and then email it to the FreeBSD project.
Well, actually, it emails it to you, and then you decide if you want to send it.
Unless you turn on the automated flag, which will just shoot it out there. But you can review it optionally. So if you're concerned about maybe any private info being in it, you can edit that out before you submit it. But it's automatically encrypted before being sent. So hopefully it won't get snatched in transit. But that's going to be really cool because FreeBSD, it never really kernel panics. But when it does, it would be nice if somebody could look at it.
It doesn't kernel panic often. But when it does, it'd be nice to know if the problem you're having is the same as someone else. And, if there's this pattern, then that helps the developers find what it is. Because a lot of times the developers can't have the same hardware as everybody else. Everybody's got different hardware.
And the case I'm thinking for was like PCBSD, right? I still see a fair amount of kernel panics just on a variety of hardware, and it's usually related to the same three things: video, suspend, resume, and maybe networking, like a weird Wi-Fi card or something. So we're looking at turning that on for 10 actually, because it may be helpful to get this up to the developers and say, okay, all these Intel Wi-Fi NICs are kernel panicking after you restart them, or the new AMD driver on this chipset is broken. Right. And it gives them a good place to start looking at debugging. Yeah.
And he worked with Alfred a little bit to see what features the system like this that's built into FreeNAS has and what could be learned from that.
Yep, yep. Looks like they're kind of sharing some work there, so that's pretty cool. I'm really glad to see that. So again, thank you so much, Colin, for putting that in. And hopefully, you'll be seeing some good debug logs from PCBSD users on 10 here soon.
Right. So yeah, that was
anyway,
he had built something kind of like that just to deal with kernel panics on the Amazon instances he runs, and he's just extended this. You might as well have everybody do it, right?
Well, in my case, on desktops, for example, a lot of the people running it are just using it as a desktop. They don't know or care to know how to go fetch the kernel dump and send it in. It's just too much effort, but this just makes it easy. It's like we can just turn it on and then let it go. And that's kind of what we want. But that'll actually wrap up our weekly news. But next up, we have a very cool interview we just did with Justin Sherrill last night from the DragonflyBSD project, and also the maintainer, author, starter of the Dragonfly Digest. So lots of good information. Looking forward to the interview. Hope you guys enjoy it, and we'll see you when you come back. Today we're joined with Justin Sherrill of the DragonflyBSD project. Great to have you with us, Justin.
Great to be here.
Yes, thank you for coming.
So let's just kind of get started with this. And we asked this of most of our interviewees, but first, give us a little background about yourself. How'd you get involved with BSD? How come you got into DragonflyBSD specifically?
Well, my first exposure to BSD was probably somewhere around 2000. I remember seeing somebody reference BSD as an operating system you could install. And I think my very first install was FreeBSD 4 on a host that I had to set up for FTP at my workplace. I was working at Time Warner at the time. And I wanted to avoid using Microsoft's FTP product, which is probably perfectly understandable.
Yeah, good reasons for that.
Yeah. And I thought, oh, hey, this is fun to use. And of course, I set it up totally wrong. It crashed a lot. But it was interesting, and I ended up using it for a home server and went from there, and eventually ended up putting my personal domain on it. And I think it was just about 10 years ago, Matt Dillon announced Dragonfly as a branch from FreeBSD. And I said, oh, this is interesting. Let me see if I can get involved. And that was both entailed installing it and running it, and eventually the digest work that I do, which we can talk more about later. Yeah, I guess that's the entire timeline, up to about 9 years ago.
Okay.
Cool. So what is your role in the DragonflyBSD project?
Well, I'm tempted to say it's secretary, because I end up documenting a lot of stuff. I think my average level of number of commits to the project is averaging about one a year at this rate. Most
Got to keep that commit bit alive.
Yeah, just token commit, added white space. A lot of the stuff I do is sort of the paraphernalia, the other bits. The digest, of course, all the time. Somehow I've managed to fall into the role of release manager, if you can call that a role, where I do the branching and the building of release images. For quite a while, I did the bulk builds of package source for Dragonfly and uploaded them for people to use so that they would have binaries. And the last 6 years now, I've ended up the organization manager for Dragonfly and Summer of Code every time we participate.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So it's a good amount of work now that I look back on it and think about it, but I'm not actually creating any code, strangely enough.
Yeah, but those roles are just as important as the code. I mean, if you can't market it, talk about it, document it, I mean, then the code often is just worthless.
Yeah, it's just Greek on page.
So
build it and they will come mentality. Of course, it would make a great operating system. Wouldn't download it,
Right. Yeah. Of course, you have to hear about it first to know to go try it out, right?
Exactly.
Yep. So our audience, I'll just be honest with you, we haven't talked a whole lot about Dragonfly, just because personally I haven't run it, and I don't know if you have, Alan. But
not lately.
Not lately. It's been a while. So give us a little bit of overview from somebody maybe coming from Linux who knows a little bit about maybe FreeBSD or Open, but what's the difference with Dragonfly? What makes it more special and compelling over the different varieties?
Well, at the time Dragonfly was branched, the major conflict, I won't say conflict, but the divergence was between Matt Dillon's planned method for doing symmetric multiprocessing and the direction that FreeBSD was going. I wasn't necessarily part of any of this stuff, so I'm hopefully not going to ruffle anybody's feathers by describing what everybody else was thinking.
Right.
But I think at the time, if I remember correctly, FreeBSD was going to what was it? BSDOS's model for multiprocessing. I don't remember the details. But it was a relatively heavy locking system. And Matt Dillon's preferred approach was to keep things as light and uncomplicated as possible. So when people said, no, we're going this direction, he said, well, this is open source, I can fork. And that's where Dragonfly started. The end result, and this is actually a relatively recent thing, is Dragonfly system is, I think, almost completely without the giant locks that originally are common through much of the BSD world. I'm wandering out of my territory of expertise, but it is by and large focused on token passing and a system of passing tokens to indicate when you have a process that's able to memory or various other parts of the system and letting go of it as soon as it blocks, as opposed to having a mechanism where you have to lock and unlock through multiple layers as things change. And I'll note that I'm describing this as something that I'm regurgitating what other people have said to me or said to other people when they ask it. So you're getting like the secondhand description here.
Right.
But anyway, another early goal of the project was single system image computing, which actually has turned out not to be as big of an advantage as you would think, because computers have so many processors now, you don't actually need to farm out your processing power from machine to machine. However, computers are also a lot more disposable now, and that you end up with a whole lot of different machines in the different places and a whole lot more bandwidth between them. So the project that Matt has been working on for quite a while now is the file system, Hammer. Hammer version 1 is what's in the operating system now. There's a whole bunch of buzzwords that go with this. Distributed, snapshotting, historical, master and slave oriented file system. I'm probably missing a few phrases, but essentially you can keep file system history. You can spawn or you can roll all your data off to slave file systems. You can keep history in as much history as you want, as much as you have space for.
Right.
You can copy from one system to the other. As I said, it's master slave, so you have one main copy and then slaves that can take copies of that data over a relatively slow network like the internet, so to speak. Those slave file systems can have different history retention policies, so you can keep that data for different amounts of time. The system does online and offline deduplication. There is also Hammer 2, which is the new version he's working on, is multi-master, meaning you can have multiple systems all matching each other.
Right. So you can write to more than one place at once.
Yes. And again, over relatively slow links, you don't have to have some sort of switching fabric set up to push all your computers together. We had a Summer of Code project just this past summer for compression, which has actually gone into the Hammer 2 code that is being worked on right now. So, for instance, I want to see LZW compression and one other type, which I just read yesterday, and I don't remember what it was. But essentially, you'd be able to plug different types of compression into your file system. So Essentially, it's oriented around the idea that you'd have volumes, and your method of backup is essentially duplicating those volumes to other places over the network.
Sure.
And if something fails, you promote a different system up.
Yeah.
Okay.
It sounds like quite an interesting mix of like ZFS, HAST, and some stuff that just doesn't exist on FreeBSD.
Yeah. Combine all those bits into one file system.
Yeah. ZFS is the most common comparison. I'd say the biggest difference for somebody who's familiar with ZFS is that ZFS is sort of it's the file system, but it's also the file system management software built into it.
Right.
So a lot of people, when they say, I like ZFS, what they really like is having tools where you can kind of wave your hands and say, oh, well, do what I mean.
Right. Or yeah, it's actually more the volume manager than the file system that is giving you all the features, like cold storage. But I guess the biggest difference I noticed there would be in ZFS you can do send and receive replication, but it's point in time. It's not continuous. Whereas with Hammer it'd be continuous.
Yeah. I'll give an example. My server right now in the basement has 2 disks in it. One is the master, one is the slave. And everything that's going on the one disk is happening on the other. So if the main disk dies, I can just take the other one, promote it to master, and poof, I've got a drive again.
But that's
barring anything that got corrupted on the way over.
Is that synchronous or asynchronous? Like when you write something, does it have to wait till it's written to the master and the slave?
No, it's as far as I know, it's written immediately to the master, and then the master spools it off as it has time for it.
Yeah, see that was actually a feature I was talking to Matt Aarons about, because specifically for a laptop, it's like if I have a fast SSD and a slow hard drive, I don't want to just mirror them. I want the hard drive to just be a slave so that I can get all the speed of writing to the SSD, and then the hard drive will just catch up eventually.
Well, we were talking about in the case of like an external USB disk where I can plug it in periodically and it would sync back up, and then I can unplug it and go do something and come back, and I still have my data there.
Yeah.
Funny you should say that. That is something you could do. I mean, you'd want to manually kick off the synchronization if you had a drive that wasn't always available. But another Dragonfly feature is a thing called where essentially you take, this is the scenario it's specifically designed for, is you take a fast drive like an SSD and a slow drive that's also probably large, some sort of spindle, and you set up the fast drive, which is probably, you can say a 40 gig SSD, for instance, cheap, relatively speaking, and make that your swap cache, so to speak, drive. That space now becomes where all your disk information is cached. So you then, as soon as your caches heat up, meaning the data has passed through once, it's saved to the SSD, and you have the advantage of all the space of the large drive, but given that you're usually handling mostly the same data all the time, you get the speed of the SSD.
Yep.
So it's pretty much the scenario you're talking about, where all your information is coming from a fast disk, but you get the advantage of the storage.
Being backed up by the bigger one.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like the thing Chris and I talked about in San Francisco, the idea of like a persistent L2 arc, except for it would also be, it sounds like it also does the right, so it would be like a combination ZIL L2 arc and persistent. So
yeah, that would be really that would be the closest comparison. Yeah. We have that now on the various Dragonfly machines that are used for compiling stuff.
I imagine it makes a difference there.
Oh my goodness, yes, it makes a huge difference, and it's a very easy way to make a difference because it's generic enough so that it's just a drive and a drive. I mean, you could do it with 2 hard disks if you wanted, though you wouldn't get much advantage.
Right.
But it's a way to build your own like hybrid SSD.
Essentially, without having to worry about it being crappy hardware.
Or firmware.
My fantasy thing would be to have some sort of setup where you could just turn a whole bunch of RAM into a disk volume somehow, and use that as the caching location, and then just whatever for the rest of the disk.
Well, if you have enough money, you could buy like a Fusion IO card.
Oh yeah.
All right, so
more RAM.
yeah, there you go. So switching gears a little bit here, you guys have a new 3.6 release, so give us a little bit of detail on that. What's new in it?
Well, that one, give me 1 second here. I'll just click over to the... I tagged the release candidate for that last week, and I have a whole list of the stuff from that. The big changes for that are... let's see. We're switching to D ports, which is the Dragonfly version of the port system on FreeBSD. One of the Dragonfly developers, a guy named John Marino, took... it's French, so I don't know if I'm saying it right, but Poudriere?
Yeah. Well, close enough. Yeah. That's how everybody that speaks English says it.
Yes, that works. The thing that translates to the word boom. Took that, brought it to Dragonfly, and used it as a testing tool to get as much of FreeBSD ports building on Dragonfly. So we now have a binary collection built for ports. So previously we'd used package source, which was good, but it was hard to keep people working on it for Dragonfly. Just working on ports is the kind of thing that burns people out.
Yeah.
So, and it is, even though it is a cross-platform system, it tends to be oriented towards NetBSD, which is just a natural outflow of being where it came from. So it was very hard to keep things building on it. And because of the quarterly release system that package source has, we'd have maybe a month and a half of a good release, and then either the quarterly release that we built for that release of Dragonfly would reach the end of its cycle, or we'd reach the end of the Dragonfly release cycle, which is every 6 months, about. It wasn't great. So we had a lot of the time somebody would have, Firefox would work on one release, but the next release it wouldn't, and it was sort of people would get surprised a lot.
Yeah, and Firefox is kind of a fast-moving target as well.
Sure.
Yes, there's that. And then larger things like KDE would break down. So we made the shift to D ports, which was available as an experiment in the last release, 3.4 of Dragonfly, but it will be default in the 3.6 release.
Okay.
It comes with pre-built binaries, so and a binary installation system package, or PKG. It's always very strange to have to pronounce the names of things that you've only ever read out loud.
Yeah.
So this 3.6 release, you'll be able to generally put all software on your system with binary downloads very quick. So, let's see what else is in this release. We have a port of the Intel i915 driver. That's how you pronounce it.
The video drivers.
Also, the ATI driver, the ones that require KMS, are in there now. They haven't had a long time to bake, so they're still experimental. But in theory, at least, if you have, for instance, a newer laptop, you should be able to get it running then. There's a number of other recent changes. There's been work on Hammer 2, as I said, the multi-master version of Hammer. It's not ready for prime time yet at all, but it's there, and the work is coming in. We had there's USB 4 BSD, which is the same BSD framework that is used in nice FreeBSD right now. It is not there by default, but it is in there as something you can try. You have to switch to it manually because it's not ready for prime time yet. We've also had a locale update, also from John Marino, which is pretty extensive. So handy for anybody who's not speaking English. And to keep looking. There's the normal updates of a variety of libraries and third-party software, material like that. If you are using any sort of higher bandwidth hardware, Sephirosa Zaihao, I really hope I'm saying his name right, has been bringing in and improving drivers for a variety of equipment, BMX driver, a bunch of other ones, IGB, and other work. But he specifically works on a video delivery network in China. It has Dragonfly for all his servers.
Oh.
So he spends his time saying, how many packets can I push through here per second?
Yeah.
And the answer is generally a lot. He does a very good job of improving bandwidth. So,
yeah,
but all those changes are in this release.
Yeah, we saw similar stuff with just having seen Netflix presentations over the last year and a bit, watching them, breaking the 10 gigabit layer and then the 20 gigabits per server, and then like now they're up to like 30 gigabits a server. It's like, wow, that's some steady progress you got there.
They need it given how much data they're pushing.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
So you mentioned it kind of a little bit before. Dragonfly Digest, the website. Could you tell us a little bit about what it is and what you do?
Sure. That was the thing that I started with for Dragonfly back in maybe it was 2004, I think, when I had first started publishing stuff. I guess the origin of it is Jean-Louis Gasset, the fellow in the B Company B, if you remember that from the late 2000s. I'm pretty sure the quote is attributed to him, but he said something about how every operating system needs to have an atmosphere, needs to have oxygen so that people breathe. And so you end up having to create that atmosphere yourself. And so what he meant by that was you have to make sure that people can talk about the operating system, talk about using it, talk about the environment around it, not just the operating system and the surrounding stuff itself. So my goal there was one of the problems, it's not necessarily a problem, but one of the things with FreeBSD and NetBSD and OpenBSD is that they've always used mailing lists, which is great for direct communication. And it was great for communication 15 years ago, but it's very hard for anybody to see it.
Sure.
I may be preaching to the choir to you guys since you're obviously doing this over video, but I've always wanted to see more stuff about BSD operating systems online and to have that sort of conversation where people can look up material about it without having to actually be using it all the time. I mean, there's a lot of great information in the mailing lists for all the systems, but you have to sit there and read the mailing list all day long.
Yeah, especially trying to, if you go back, it's like, well, I wasn't on the mailing list before, so to catch up, I would have to read every single message ever, and that's just not doable.
Yes.
You don't quite get the same curated archive that you would get from a site like yours.
Yes. And then the other advantage that I was trying for was having somebody who was looking at it and saying, this is good, this is worth looking at, this is worth looking at. So you can kind of push aside all that, the noise, the transitory stuff that comes and goes.
Sure.
I guess one example would be kernel trap, which does the same sort of thing for the Linux kernel, or at least did. I don't think they're that active anymore. But they would specifically call out messages and activities and say, this is what happened and this is what it means. Since for a lot of the world, a lot of this stuff is impenetrable. You can say, oh, we did this. And somebody will say, well, how does that affect me?
What is a bottom line kind of guy? Like, okay, that's great. What does that mean for me tomorrow or next week or whatever?
Yeah, or what does that mean for actually using this? Or what impact does that have on me doing things?
What does that even mean, period?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And if you're, I'll be nice and I won't typify it by naming certain websites full of benchmarks and hype, but the way people usually want it to be is just, well, this made it faster. Now it's totally fast because it's fast, and now it's faster. Is the way they want it explained. But the results of what your people are working on is one thing. And the flip side of that, I'm going way off into theory here, but you want to sort of push things out to an audience about BSD operating systems, and specifically Dragonfly. But you also want to go in the opposite direction because this is an all-volunteer workforce. Everybody working on the various BSDs, almost everybody is doing it on their own. Right? There's not money just sort of sloshing around the atmosphere like it is with, say, Linux.
Right.
So a lot of these people are doing it as volunteers. So there's the flip side is if you actually pick out what people do and say, hey, we have this big improvement and this person did it. I mean, when you don't have any money, this is how you pay people, currency of recognition, saying this person gets credit for doing such a good job.
Sure. Yeah, well, that's a lot of the drive behind BSD is, the license is to get the code out there, because the reward for writing the code for the developer is seeing people use it. And so when you can promote it and the developer and say, this guy wrote this really cool thing, you should try it out, and it gets more people using it, that's where the payoff comes from for them.
Yes. And it also gives somebody someplace to put the feedback, so that when somebody does this work, they have people coming to them and saying, hey, this worked great, and I did this with it. Or, hey, this didn't work great, and I did this with it.
Well, yeah, I think that's the other thing, is a lot of times developers build something and all they get are the problem reports. They don't get the success reports.
Sure.
Or worse, crickets.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah, that happens a lot too. And so they, they lose their drive to finish it. Meanwhile, a bunch of people were using it and loving it, and they're like, well, why'd you stop?
Well, I didn't say anything because it worked fine. I mean, it works for me,
Yeah.
Well, so how does this exactly work for you day to day, and how do you decide what to post? Are you reading the mailing lists and just setting up priorities of things?
Yeah, by and large, it's reading the mailing lists. I have as voracious a reading habit as I can handle for RSS feeds to try and pick things out. The trick is to try and find things that I can post about in a succinct way that'll make sense. So when somebody updates a driver, that's great, because there's a version number and a change log. That's very easy to figure out. Or when somebody adds a brand new separate command or feature, that's the best thing ever, because then you can link right to the man page to say what it does. The worst thing is when somebody's got a massive change that takes 20 commits and 3 weeks to get in there, just because it's hard to summarize, basically. So, but yeah, it's essentially read a whole lot, and everything that makes me say, hey, that's kind of cool, I turn around and try to make a post about it. The interesting thing is that it's just the software I'm using is just a WordPress blog, nothing exciting.
Sure.
It used to be that I set myself a goal of having something every day, because people are going to want to see something every day, by and large. I guess maybe 2007, 2008 time frame, maybe a little earlier than that, I was hard pressed to come up with one thing per day. These days, I'm usually posting ahead of time. I'm usually pre-posting because I have enough stuff. Because once I have 2 things per day, I usually say, okay, let's overflow, and then work out from there.
Yeah,
so it's a good thing.
When I was first asked to do a show about BSD by some of the audience of my other show, and I was like, I don't think there's enough stuff to do a show every week, and it doesn't make sense to try to do it less often than that. And then it got brought up again and again, and so I looked at it more seriously, and we started writing this Google Doc of just some of the stuff we would cover on it. And then when it got to 8 pages, we're like, oh, I suppose there is enough content to do an hour every single week.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just covering Dragonfly, really, and that's one operating system, a relatively small, young one, especially compared to the other BSDs. And I'm still coming up with stuff all week long, by and large. And I'm not only, I can imagine if somebody was reading OpenBSD MISC and FreeBSD questions and, I guess NetBSD General. I don't remember which one it is. I can't imagine you'd be down to the hour in terms of stuff to post. But it's all buried in mailing lists. It's just you got to have somebody who's willing to sit there and turn around and do the swivel chair of let me pull it out of the mailing list and put it somewhere else.
I think it's kind of funny. We have a little hierarchy here. You're sorting through theirs, and then we read your digest and use that to plan our show. And we kind of build off one another.
Yeah, I started to notice. It's not so much now, but I set up one of those Google search things that sends you data. Or sends you, keyword searches on a regular basis. And I thought, I'll set one up for DragonflyBSD. And then it was like every 2 months, I'd find some sort of spam blog that was scraping stuff off of the digest and just reposting it somewhere. And all I could think was, of all the things to scrape, operating system minutia is probably the least profitable.
Yep. I don't imagine how you could possibly come up with something that would get less clicks than that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just means that you're publishing to all the right places. So do you do any sort of special features or anything on the website?
The thing that I built up recently is, well, two things actually. Saturdays I do an in other BSDs post because I realized stuff was happening for the other BSDs, and I would sometimes see the edges of it, and I'd want to post it somewhere. So I figure a regular feature for that is a good idea.
Yep,
sure.
And it's been successful, and I have to say I am eternally grateful for the fact that PCBSD uses Git, and so the subject lines actually show up in the subject of the email. So when I'm swimming through the, let's see, this is PCBSD, OpenBSD, NetBSD, FreeBSD, and Dragonfly mailing lists all together, I'm probably getting, I don't know, somewhere between 300 and 500 emails a day, something like that, depending on activity. And it's, you know, I filter through it as quick as I can, but it's much easier with the PCBSD stuff because I can actually look at the subject lines and translate from there. So I guess this is my open plea for all the other operating systems to please put links into your commit messages or have more descriptive subject lines because, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
The worst thing is trying to puzzle my way back to an OpenBSD commit message because I'll have the email, but I usually use the mark.info archive for there, and I have to look at the committer's name and the relative time of day that it was committed and sort of guess from there because I can't tell from the subject. So there's a lot of sort of clicking around until I can find a thing to actually go to for people. That's just a side effect of using CVS and so on. But
there's a website called freshbsd.org that tracks all the version control things and lets you do searches. You can do search by committer or date or project and branch and things like that. We find it useful for finding specific commits based on email messages and things like that.
Yeah, I may just have to start using that.
Although I have noticed the commit messages in FreeBSD tend to be slightly better. Oftentimes with the the NetBSD ones that we were looking at, and it's like, you know, implemented Lua in the kernel. It's like, that's all you have to say?
What?
It's like, what does it do? A couple of sentences would be good.
Yeah.
Well, see, now if I just had 5 or 6 more hours in the day, a lot of that stuff, the discussion happens on a separate mailing list, and then the output you see is the commit.
Exactly.
You know, especially for something like Lua. I know that was talked about in lots of other places, but oh my goodness, I don't know if I can do that much reading in a day, even if I didn't have to work.
Yep.
I get through it all.
Yep.
That would be an awesome job, though.
Yes, it would. And hopefully, actually, the guy that implemented Lua in the NetBSD kernel said once he finishes the documentation, he'll come on and do an interview about it. So maybe we can find out more about that.
So next up, when and why did you start the digest? How long have you been doing this now?
Geez, it was 2004 when I started writing articles, but I was clever and I didn't tell anybody about it for I think a month. It was one of those. You've probably seen this on mailing lists. Somebody comes on and says, "I'm totally going to write drivers for the NVIDIA video cards," or "I'm going to write a new file system," you know, something crazy like that. And then you never hear from them again.
Yep.
Or you get 1 or 2 questions where they say something like, you know, "I'm going to write a new video driver. Do I install X?" or something like that.
Yeah.
And you just kind of know it's not going to work out. So it was I wanted to see if I could do it and if I could stick to it, and then I would have something to show. And when I said to people, "Hey, look at this thing I'm doing," they would know what it was I was talking about because it would actually have examples.
Yeah.
So it's been 10 years now of writing those articles, or 10 years? 10 years of Dragonfly. I don't know if I've reached the 10-year anniversary for the digest yet.
Well, if it was 2004, then not quite, but pretty close.
Getting close, yeah.
But
yeah, I have to scroll all the way back.
I know we kind of felt the same way with the show. It's like, you know, that's why we started with that big Google Doc. And it's like, well, let's plan out a couple of episodes because, you know, I've seen a couple other podcasts try to start up about BSD and they have like 1 or 2 episodes and then it kind of fizzles out. And it's like, well, I don't want to do that. If we're going to do this, we want to be serious and, you know, every week get it out on time and make sure, you know, people can only tune in if it's actually going to be there. You know, if they keep showing up and it's not there, then they're going to stop coming back.
Yeah, that's the big thing that people get rewarded by is just being dependable.
Yep.
Even if you don't have very much to say, as long as you know, show up and say, yes, I'm still paying attention, that makes people a lot happier about reading it.
Exactly.
Just to look at it, I think my total stats right now is 5,628 posts.
Wow.
So
that's
I'm averaging. So that's 500 posts a year. So something like 1.3 per day or something like that.
Giving that WordPress a workout, huh?
Yeah. 3,176 comments. Oh, I'm sorry, 3,037 comments. I was looking at comments, but not approved comments. 139 spam. So people have noticed, which is good.
Yes. So based on your experiences, what do you think some of the goals for the various BSD projects should be moving forward?
Oh, geez. Well, I mean, obviously, this is no surprise given what we've been talking about for the last while, but I think better outreach is definitely a topic to go into. The engaging users is something that BSD Unix has always been kind of bad at. Maybe not bad at, but indifferent to would be the phrase.
Right. Well, nobody wants to deal with the unwashed masses, right?
Yes. Or there's people decide they do want to, and they quickly burn out trying to help people get through a variety of issues. I think the trick, and I'm biased, so of course I would think this, but building up that sort of ecosystem of BSD stuff would be a good thing. I'm sure this is going to make somebody slam down their drink while looking at their monitor and say, no way. But I would argue that the GPL license is, for lack of a better phrase, the best marketing tool that Linux could have had, because it made people say, not just here's a tool that I could use, it's here's a tool I should use, because of the way it's licensed. Not that they necessarily saw benefit from the GPL, did or did not, but people said this is the sort of standard I'm getting behind. And we've never had that sort of standard bearing for the BSD license, though of course I would think it's better.
Right.
But there's never been anybody who said, we should fight for really truly free software as opposed to sort of free software.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's not really a heck of a rallying cry right there.
Right.
But
it's a fun point to make. I've done Linux conferences where I've shown the GPL and its history getting bigger over time, and then the BSD license is like, and we lost a clause, and it's smaller, and it's small. It's just, that gets a lot of attention.
You just kind of picture like printing out the GPL on like a scroll. So you just get up on the stage and it gets unfurls, and then you hold up a business card and it's got the BSD license on it. It's like, which one do you want to read?
Yeah, which one would your 2 out of 3 lawyers recommend?
Not the ones paid by the word.
Yes. Sure. 2 out of 3 lawyers recommend you have this one, so you have to pay them to read it for you. Everybody else recommends you use this one because you don't need a lawyer to tell if you're in compliance or not.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
So
the goals, I can go on about this at great length, unfortunately. But that sort of outreach thing, I think, is we have PCBSD sort of doing the job of the distributions of Linux, where somebody can pick, it's all the same thing. With Linux, it's always the same kernel, different revisions of it. But PCBSD is sort of there for somebody to get eased into it, or somebody who wants to approach it from a graphical standpoint. and we have, I mean, I would like to see a whole bunch of variations like that on the different BSDs, where, in part because it sort of serves different audiences, but it's also good for developers, because they can take, when I say developers, meaning anybody who wants to contribute, because it gives different areas of contribution for people.
Right.
Somebody can click on the aspects of the system that they're familiar with.
Not everyone has a 1U rack mount somewhere in their house they can mess with. You know, they're going to try it on their laptop first, right?
I do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, we have the advantage for BSD that we have a complete system. It's not just a kernel.
Right.
So it would be great to have a way for people to build very custom distributions of it. And that's already happened. You have things like pfSense and what is it?
FreeNAS.
Yes, FreeNAS. And I mean, those are very specific variations of BSD, purpose-built. And I think it really makes things easier to do that with BSD, because it's not something where you're just cobbling together a bunch of packages and saying,
Right.
you know, here's my blah, blah, blah Linux. So that has a big advantage. So I think there's more space in the market, so to speak. Not necessarily a paying market, but there's more space in the ecosystem for people to come up with custom setups like that. It would be interesting to do. Sort of like, what is it? Like the fix-it distributions of Linux.
Sure,
where
the toolkits.
Nobody ever installs it. They just boot from it when they've got a screwed up Windows setup. And that's a little easier with Linux because of the wide drivers or wide array of supported hardware. But there isn't. There was, I think, a security flavor distribution of FreeBSD at one point, I think.
I think so. And I used Frisbee for a while as a live CD.
Yep. We've all tried different ones. I remember running MonoWall for a while, and
But it was interesting, actually. I was talking to Paul Doedek at the FreeBSD party 2 weeks ago, and we were talking to him a little bit about making some like an SDK or a framework or something for building appliances on top of ZFS, because his company is building an appliance on top of ZFS and Capsicum, and so it sounds like there's going to be some movement there as far as kind of providing more of those little bits of glue and tools for people to build custom distributions and appliances. Because a lot of the times now it's like, well, here's most of the bits, and then you just have to, stick them together. But a lot of times you end up reinventing the wheel for that, and sometimes companies invent a square wheel.
I kind of feel like FreeBSD, with what we do, it's kind of like that, and the port treaters Lego blocks, and we're just stacking them in different ways to try and assemble something. And I think there's definitely room to improve a lot of tools to make that easier.
Yeah. Lego works better if you have that flat piece at the bottom, the part you start with.
The base.
Yeah.
The approach of having a binary packaging system, I think, is a good thing for everybody involved. Because exactly for that reason, for the idea of the sort of Lego bits, so you can assemble it quick. For some reason, it's always worked out that way for the BSD systems. Everything gets built from source, which is great, but it's time consuming and
it's a high barrier to entry too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, even FreeBSD had binary packages, but when they're 6 months old, they're not very useful.
Yeah, nobody would want to install from it. You lose that speed advantage that you get from them.
Yeah. So you'd always want to install them, but then you would need something customized, and then when you try to mix them with ports, it just all went sideways. But with the new package system, because they're up to date, you can mix them with the ports without causing dependency problems.
Yes, which is exactly the way it should be.
Yes.
I would think you could make a convincing argument that the success of Debian, and the reason there's so many variants of not just Linux but Debian specifically, is the packaging system.
Sure.
The ostensible reason for Debian is to build all free software, which I'm sure there's some people that care about, but I think that the proportion of people using Debian and Debian offshoots are more interested in the ability to say, I want this package to install, and being always able to say, there it is, no matter what.
I was really surprised to find out that the Debian packages are just built by the random developers and then committed. They're not actually, they don't have like a build cluster or anything like that. I found that really strange.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that. That certainly makes life easier if you just push the responsibility on everybody everywhere.
I suppose, but you know, at the same time, it's like I don't know if I like that idea either. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Well, I mean, there's a reason that people there's so many people that say, well, I'll just use Debian testing, and they jump to, whatever versions of the packages.
Right.
Because they don't feel like waiting for the, interrelated versions to all build up, basically.
Yeah.
Sure. So you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but what kind of outreach do you think should be done by the various BSD groups?
Well, the sort of stuff you see now with the FreeBSD Foundation, I think is great. The stuff that they do with making sure that there's people actually getting to conferences and that there's conversations happening and that work is getting done is really a good thing to have happen. The sort of dream that everybody thinks about is the idea of having a commercial company come in, sort of like what IBM or Red Hat does, and say, oh, we'll just sponsor a bunch of developers. That is good, especially if you're one of those developers, but it doesn't necessarily contribute to the growth of the system overall. It just focuses on the targeted area. It's good to have a company with a profit motive that sits there and says, we're going to work on the things that specifically benefit us as part of the operating system, so that they can get that benefit, and then the whole community shares in it because it's open source, et cetera, et cetera.
Right, and then the FreeBSD Foundation fills in the gap by sponsoring the projects that nobody else is going to do. The little bits that don't actually benefit anybody's business case, but are kind of required to move us forward.
Or they do, but they're messy and nobody wants to touch them because maybe they don't have the resources to tackle something that messy.
Yeah. But that's sort of working on the ecosystem that they do, where they send people to conventions, and then the person comes back from the convention and says, this is what I did. I went, was it 2 years ago now? Or is 1 year ago? The New York City BSD convention, like NYC BSD Con.
It would have been 3 years ago now, I think, but yeah.
Yeah. I went to that, and I just had the best time because there was a whole bunch of other people. And you don't really realize this, but most people's experience of BSD is, you get to look at a website, you get to read a mailing list, and that's all you ever meet. Or if you're lucky, maybe you'll show up in a video podcast. But going to a convention is a great thing and really helps that ecosystem, for lack of a better phrase.
That's how I got involved in all this. I finally, after years of saying I should go, I actually went to a BSD Can, and it was such an amazing experience. I've gone to every conference since.
Yeah, it's totally worth it. I would recommend it to people because, we're computer users, which pretty much guarantees we're not the most outgoing people. But it's a good idea to go to one of those because you're locked in a room with a whole bunch of other people that have the same problems as you.
Well, I think the biggest advantage is just being in a room full of people that speak the same language as you.
Sure.
And just you get to...
Well, sometimes being able to talk face-to-face is worth, hours of typing.
Yes, or hundreds of emails.
Mailing lists. Yeah.
But not just that,
sit down over... have a beer and eat and discuss a problem, and at the end come up with a solution that maybe you would have argued about for weeks somewhere else.
But I think it also helps. I've heard a number of people describe it as it's going to the conference recharges their BSD battery. It gets them excited about a project again because they got to actually talk with someone and hear what problem they were having or what how something I built solved a problem for them or whatever. And it gets them excited again, and you get that much more push out of it. Especially with volunteers, when they lose interest, and they can just go away. But if you can, get that face-to-face and get them excited about it again, then you can squeeze more out of them.
Pull all their volunteer juice. The big thing that I find is that having that sort of community pulls people back in. It sort of stops that burnout, as you
exactly.
said. It makes people know what people are doing, know what other people are doing with their stuff. It also makes you encounter things that you don't normally run into. Just scenarios where there's people that aren't communicating via all the normal methods. Because it takes a certain amount of persistence and stubbornness to actually dip your toes into the mailing list or whatever medium and just stick with it for a long time.
Yep.
I mean, if you think about it, if you take all the various open source products that you use and you imagine there's at least one mailing list or method of communication for the people developing each one, there's no way you're going to watch all of them.
Exactly.
Sure.
So, I mean, you could arguably say that that's what ports and package source are, is essentially the method of keeping up with all these different software packages without having to actually keep up with the software packages. You get whoever's the port maintainer or package maintainer to do it for you.
Yep.
But now I'm getting into some sort of meta conversation about third-party installation software.
Yeah.
Well, very cool, Justin.
Yes.
It's been a pleasure to have you with us this week.
Glad to be here.
Thank you very much.
Friends don't let friends use consumer networking equipment. If you're a sysadmin or a BSD or Unix fan, that's probably something you've heard many times over the years. I mean, it's really easy to go to a store and pick up a cheap little plastic router, your favorite insert brand here from different companies, but you may regret it later. First of all, they're proprietary. They could have security issues and often very little flexibility. Other times, these routers may be severely limited in functionality because they're aimed at, a consumer, and a consumer may not be very tech savvy. They just want to plug it in and get on Facebook.
Yep.
So we're going to show you how you can build your own and kind of take back control of your network. Note, this is going to be only a wired router that we're looking at today, not Wi-Fi. So we may do that at a later point, but this is going to be complicated enough as it is. So let's just keep it a little simpler today. But I should probably go ahead and start by defining exactly what a router is, since everyone has a little bit different requirements. So for what we're going to be doing today is basically a drop-in replacement for one of those cheap consumer ones you could go get, say, at your favorite big box store. I've got 3 computers here we're going to be needing to share my cable internet connection with. One of them may be a FreeBSD server that I want to be able to SSH into remotely, but I don't want other inbound connections to pass through. This means the router is going to be doing the following things. It's going to be performing your NAT lookups. It's going to be giving my server and laptop static IP addresses, handing out local IP addresses via DHCP. We're going to be doing some DNS local caching on the LAN, allowing incoming SSH connections to the FreeBSD server I mentioned earlier. We'll be allowing incoming SSH connections to the router as well, maybe for maintenance, although you can disable that if you don't need to get in that way. But in this case, we'll only be doing it on IPv4. We can talk about IPv6 later. And it'll also be automatically emailing us whenever there's an update available. And optionally, we're going to do some redirecting of all the traffic or maybe certain parts through Tor or a VPN, etc. And we're going to try and make this not too much of a pain to set up, at least for you guys. But if you're not comfortable setting things up via the command line, a good alternative to this is maybe go out and check out pfSense, which is a FreeBSD-based product. That is a great option. It'll allow you to buy whatever hardware you want. Just make sure the NICs are supported beforehand. In this case, we're going to be using a Intel NIC here that are known to have good BSD support. The ultimate router will be running nothing more than OpenBSD in this tutorial. So everything we're going to include in the we're going to be talking about is already included in the base system unless we otherwise note it, which is pretty stinking cool to have out of box.
Yeah, and the install is small. The ISO is like 200 megabytes or something.
Oh man, yeah, that's really cool. So the same setup could be done with FreeBSD if that's your particular cup of tea, but you'll need to use maybe some of the older PF syntax than what we're going to be showing here in the tutorial. And the DHCP server you may have to grab from the ports tree, and there's maybe one, or is there a couple more in there now?
Yeah. There's a couple things.
I think there's a few in there. But anyway, pick the one you like the most. So if you're using FreeBSD, of course, the files may be in different locations, but this guide is written purely from the OpenBSD perspective. So take it with a grain of salt if you're doing this on FreeBSD. On their website, they also have a little write-up about setting up a home gateway, which provided a little bit of foundation for the tutorial's PF config we're going to be showing you. We're also going to assume that you're capable of installing the OS on your machine yourself. You have a working internet connection, And if you have a serial cable, you can install it that way. In this case, we used the whole device as one partition and installed it to that. We're going to let a DHCP on the modem configure the first network interface, then we leave the rest of them untouched.
Yep.
The hardware we're going to use in this case has 4 NICs. They're going to show up in the OS as EM0, EM1, EM2, and EM3. And we're going to be using the first one as the external, and then the other 3 as internals for the LAN. If you need more, of course, you can go ahead and grab a system with more NICs and then customize it as you see fit. Of course, gigabit switches are a good idea too. So the centerpiece to this guide is going to be the pf config, pf.conf file. That's we have a link in the doc here to where you can read the man page for that from OpenBSD. That's where all of our firewall rules are going to go and where we can customize pretty much everything. If you'd really like to learn PF, there's a great book called The Book of PF. We highly recommend it. It'd be a great introduction to, and companion to this tutorial. TJR, our producer, has read this all the way through, and it's a great book. There's also a nice collection of slides at the link in the documents where you can take a look and get some other tips about PF. So let's go ahead and get this started, Alan. What do you got for us?
Right. So we had the 2 network interfaces. The one that's already via DHCP got an address from our modem, and then we have the second interface that is pointed at our LAN basically. And so what I did there was assign it an IP address. I did 192.168.1.1 because that's what most people are used to the router being. So now that's on that interface, and then I enabled IP forwarding. And what this does is when a packet comes in on one network card, normally the system would just be like, that's not for me, and ignore it. With the forwarding option, when it comes in on, say, the network card EM1, it'll automatically forward it out of EM0 because that's what the default gateway is. That's what the routing table tells it to do. So now all the packets that come in from the LAN will be sent out to the internet.
All right, cool.
If they're destined for the internet. Which works. The problem is that the IP addresses inside of our LAN, 192.168.1.1, are not routable. So once the packet gets out to the internet, there's no way for that person to find a way back to us. So that's where NAT, or network address translation, comes in. What that'll do is rewrite the packets so the from address, rather than being the computer on the LAN, will be the outside IP address of the router. And then the router writes that down. It's like, I changed the address on this packet from computer C on the LAN to this external address on this port, so that when the reply comes back from the internet to your outside of your router, it can then look that up in the table and be like,
figure out who that goes
I know
to.
where that came from. That originally that came from computer C on the LAN. So, and it rewrites it back and sends it on back to the LAN. So now that we got that, we also need the DHCP server. The idea here is that the computers on the LAN aren't going to know what their IP addresses are. So we're going to set up a DHCP server that will give out IP addresses. And then also, that's it. So now what we have to do is set up the DHCP config. So we have to tell it what IP addresses to give out.
Yep. Is it a ISC DHCPD that's running in OpenBSD?
I think so, yes.
Or they have their own?
I'm pretty sure it's there.
Say the syntax looks almost the same.
Yep.
So.
Right. So basically we say options domain name server. So we're setting the DNS server for the LAN. And in this case, we have the IP address of the router where we're going to run in caching name server, and as a backup, that's, I think, an OpenDNS there. And then you define a subnet saying, our little LAN network with this subnet mask. For all the computers in that range, we're going to say, use this machine as your router or default gateway, and give out IP addresses in this range. So it's going to, start giving out IP address .2, .3, .4, etc., and all the way across. You can also create what are called reservations, which are these two things here, where you say, if a machine requests an IP address and it has this specific MAC address, you'd obviously have to replace these with the actual MAC address of the machine. It would assign it that IP address. And that's how you can ensure that even though it's DHCP and auto-configured, you want the your server to always have the same IP address. And that's how you can do that.
Okay.
So now we have to make the firewall rules.
Now to the powerful PF system.
Yeah. So I just copied all the rules from the tutorial here. But basically we say our internal interface is EM1. We create an alias. This can be a space-separated list. So if you have more than one LAN where you're going to segment stuff, like at my house, I actually have an office LAN in the basement for work and then a home LAN upstairs. But they both go through the same router, just on different ports. And then also TJ helpfully has left comments for each rule that explain what each rule does. But you can see, for example, for the NAT, we'll match all outgoing packets that are going out the egress interface, which is whatever is PF magic for figuring out whatever interface the packet's actually going to leave on. We're saying when it's not from the network of that interface, so if it's not already a public IP address, then we're going to NAT it over to the public IP address. And that'll do all the translations so that the packets that actually leave your router are legitimate and can find a way back to you, right? Because if you're trying to go and request a file from a website, you can send a request, but if the IP address that it came from isn't valid, then the answer can't come back to you. You can also do stuff like anti-spoof, where basically we say, if a packet tries to come in on our internet interface with an IP address saying it's from our LAN, that's not legitimate because that's not supposed to happen, right? Because LAN IPs don't go over the internet. And lots of stuff like that. And then we also have here, we have our port forwarding. We say, if an incoming packet comes in on the outside interface on port 2496, we want to redirect that to 192.168.1.2, which is our FreeBSD server. Or, we can also set one up with for something else and so on.
So in this case, that's the port SSH would be running on the FreeBSD box.
So that's basically your port forwarding that you're used to. So now that we have all the rules in place, we just have to set up the DNS server. Right, so we will enable it by just putting named. Thanks.
So it looks like this is going to be using bind, but they're talking about moving to unbound as well. It'd be interesting. FreeBSD 10 has done that for those who don't know. So this will be a little different on FreeBSD 10.
So now we have to edit the config file for the named. And the biggest one is this ACL of clients here. We want to add to that our 192.168.1.0624. So that we will allow recursion from only those clients on our LAN. Because if you allow recursion to everyone, then your machine gets used in a DNS reflection attack, and that is bad. So you're saying, I only want to do DNS lookups on other people's domains from people I trust, which in this case would be the people inside my LAN and my local machine. And so now we just have to enable that stuff. So we can use pfctl to enable PF and apply our rule set. We can start the DNS server and the time server. And most importantly, we can start the DHCP server.
Wow, so now I can plug in my Windows box and get to the internet, right?
Right. So now, if we... where did it go? If I pull it up here, we'll switch over to my FreeBSD machine. Did it switch yet? There it goes. Now, if we look on it, we see that it doesn't have an IP address yet. So, if I run the DHCP client, it will send a broadcast. It just got an offer from our OpenBSD router, and we accepted that, and so now we've been assigned an IP address.
Oh, way you go. Very cool.
So now we can go out, and we can see that we go through our OpenBSD box, through my pfSense box that's actually on my home network, and then we go out my ISP and across the internet and get to Google. And that's now you've built a router.
Almost too easy. All just on an out-of-box OpenBSD system.
Yeah, and the PF config we use is kind of long, but I think you can do just basic NAT if you don't want all the other stuff in like 3 lines. So you can get a router up and going in a couple of minutes on basically any old machine. And all you really need is 2 network cards, and even high-end Intel gigabit network cards are $15. So it's not hard to get a machine with a pair of good NICs to do your internet.
Yeah, my thing has been I got to find a low power one, so I really don't want to have a full desktop system running 24/7 for this.
Right. I have the router I have currently is an old Pentium 3 with like 300 megabit network cards in it. But there's a couple of issues. A, it's Pentium 3, so it uses a lot of power.
Sure.
And it's big, and it's going to die soon. It's kind of old. And also the 100 megabit network cards, my internet connection is like 100 megabits. So they're really on the edge of actually being able to maximize the profit. So I bought this new short depth box from IX Systems where I'll actually have 4 gigabit NICs. So now I'll be able to throw traffic around a lot more easily. And you run PowerD on a newer Intel chip like that, and it'll underclock itself to like 150 megahertz when it's not busy. And saves a lot of power that way. And then if you actually go read the tutorial posted on the website, it's got some more detail and includes a script here to set up mail and to basically watch the OpenBSD errata list, which is a list of anything they find that's wrong with the version of FreeBSD or OpenBSD. And it will basically email you every time there's a new update. And that way you can go and update your router.
Oh, very cool.
And there's also some other stuff in here, adding more rules to the PF to do different things. Yep. More port forwarding, doing SSH tunnels. Also how to say...
VPN?
Yep. How to say traffic going to this certain place should go over Tor or VPN instead of out my regular connection. Or all traffic from this machine should go out Tor or something to that effect. And all kinds of, the things you can do with PF, we could spend a month just doing a tutorial on it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason why there's full books just on PF.
And then
that's pretty cool.
At VBSDCon, we saw a bunch of new features that are just coming out.
Well, that's really slick. So I guess that wraps up the tutorial then. Okay, well, thank you so much. So we'll be right back with the weekly news roundup. Have our weekly news roundup. We'll quickly go through some of the notables from the last week, bring you guys up to speed. So first off, we have the BSD router project 1.5 has been released. So this is actually really good timing considering we just finished our router tutorial. So this is a free BSD router distribution. It's an alternative to pfSense, but maybe not as well known at this point. So if it's something you're curious into looking into, this would be a good chance. The new version's based off a 9.2 release. It includes a lot of new general updates and bug fixes. It'll even fit on a 256 megabyte compact flash disk or USB drive, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so the BSD router project is more aimed at replacing like a big Cisco, whereas a pfSense is aimed at replacing, a Linksys.
Commercial router.
So the BSD router project is about... replacing big iron routers. So it's, does BGP and things like that as opposed to doing NAT.
Sure.
So it's very cool project. It's
maybe not something I'll put on my home network.
Right, but basically it's not really this. It's not trying to compete with pfSense. It's for a different use case.
Sure.
Yeah. So the next project, topic here is OpenBSD or OpenSSH has added a new default key exchange algorithm. Curve 25519. So starting in OpenSSH 6.5, that'll be the most preferred key exchange algorithm. And that will be interesting to see, how many people start using that.
Yeah, see how that works. Okay, well, next up, we have some new news from FreeBSD land. They've recently added kernel selection in the boot menu. So this is something that our friend Devin Teskey was actually working on, who we interviewed a few episodes back. Basically what it does, it adds a new kernel selection menu to the BSD menu you get when you first boot up your FreeBSD box. A list of kernels is taken from the kernels in loader.conf, so you can add a list up to 9 of those. That's not the same as necessarily boot environments yet, but that's the first step on the way there. So that's pretty cool. Keep up the good work.
Before, it loaded the default kernel and then drew that menu. Now it doesn't load a kernel until after that menu, so you can pick which one to do. And so, yes, that makes it the first step towards being able to select boot environments from that menu. The next step will be obviously getting a list of the boot environments and pushing them into the menu. The hard part is, because there's no limit, people are going to probably very quickly end up with more than 5 or 6 boot environments, and then that menu doesn't scale for that. And, it's written in a programming language from the 60s, so because it has to fit in really small. So doing pagination's a bit more work. It's doable. It's just, it takes some, you really have to think about it.
I know Devin likes fourth and all, man, but one of these days it's going to go away. I mean, I know some of the guys at IX like it too, and it's just like, it's too complicated of a tool for too simple of a task. I mean, we're just drawing menus here. Come on.
Right. Well, you're bootstrapping the entire operating system. It's kind of important. But we're not really as space constrained as we used to be. The boot sector on my machine is half a megabyte now. I don't have to try to compile a program that's going to fit in 512 bytes.
Yeah. I say we've moved on a little bit. I mean, even your embedded devices have megabytes of memory in most cases. So anyway, well, I'll take the next news item here, Alan. It's PCBSD related, of course. But first up, this last week, we replaced our login manager. We used to use GDM for the default login for all the desktops. We've replaced that with our own in-house one we built called PCDM, which only depends on Qt, so we don't have to suck in half of GNOME anymore to be able to log into Fluxbox, which seemed kind of silly. So that's gone, finally. And that'll be that's in the new 10 ISO. Nice. We just released this last week as well. There's a new 10 stable image that went out, and this will probably be the last 10 stable I do before I roll a 10 release, which they'll probably be branching that, I imagine, within the next week or two. In addition, we released a whole set of
release candidates in a week or two.
Yeah. So just as an explanation of how we do that in PCBSD, when they go to release candidates, we'll release a 10.0 release. And it'll actually be running release candidate 1, but then you'll be able to FreeBSD update, to release candidate 2, 3, 4, and 5 without having to do like the full world rebuild, and you'll be able to run the same package set and whatnot. So we'll put that up on the FTP server, and then we won't announce it until it's finally hit release status with FreeBSD. Cool. So that's just kind of a explanation of how we do it. It's a little different there, but it's just a convenience thing. So once you get RC1, since very little is going to change between that and the final release, there's no point in forcing you to do a full update. So anyway, that'll be coming probably in the next couple of weeks. In addition, we talked a little bit about it last week, but we released a whole set of building scripts for PCBSD. So you can now roll your own custom PCBSD images. Those scripts just got updated a couple days ago as well with some new functionality. So you'll be able to either build just world kernel and then pull packages from our package MG repo, or if you're a little more ambitious and want to run your own Podre, it has all the tools and stuff built in to let you kick off Podre, build the entire ports tree into a set of packages, and then you can customize those. We have places in our Git tree where you can throw your own custom ports in, customize what's there, overlay on top of it, etc. And then test out new features and basically roll your own custom PCBSD box. So that's pretty cool. Got some people already interested in doing that and looking forward to seeing what they come up with.
I want to look at that just because your bootloader stuff might make the ISO image I mount over IPMI boot faster.
Oh, sure.
And that would literally cut the time to install a new server for us in like half, Because right now, it takes like 4 minutes to do the install and 6 minutes to do the post-install, bring the server into our specification. But it takes 15 minutes to boot the ISO over IPMI because it reads the CD like 1 kilobyte at a time or something.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you could take a look. There's no real mystery to it. It's just using grub, make, rescue, and you throw it a directory, and it spits out an ISO. So it's not difficult, but yeah, you could definitely use this and build yourself your own image or own tool set or whatever. So that's pretty cool. So what's up next, Don?
The last news story we have is this Friday. So if you're watching live, you still have a chance to catch it. If you're watching the download, you might miss it. But Theo DeRat, the founder of OpenBSD, will be giving an informal talk at the MUUG, which is the Manitoba Unix Users Group. Not to be confused with MUG, which is the Michigan Users Group, which is where Michael Lucas gave a talk this week. And the video, we should have the video for that next week for you guys as well.
Oh, cool.
But I don't know if there'll be video of Theo's talk or not. If there is, we will give you the link, and if not, then we won't.
Okay, well, that'll be cool. Hopefully we'll have an update for you guys on that next week.
And just the Manitoba User Group is no charge. So if you live in Manitoba, maybe you'll be interested in checking that out.
Oh, very cool. Well, that's the wrap-up for our weekly news items. Next up, we'll be coming back with your feedback and questions. Okay, next up, we have feedback and questions from you in the audience. So what's our first question we got here,
Our first one is from Dave. He's asking about ZFS performance. He says he's been watching BSD Now since its inception and watching Jupiter Broadcasting for about 2 years. And he has a question about ZFS and hard drive performance. He says, when we discuss performance gains, having more drives in RAID Z, gaining linear or logarithmic performance, and also more in depth about why a power of 2 number of drives leads to better performance in ZFS. So adding more drives to a RAID Z doesn't necessarily make it faster. It can actually make it slower. So if you want fast, the best way is to create a lot of very small sets of drives. And then because ZFS will stripe across those, and that'll be faster. But you spend more on redundancy there, right? So then you're getting less storage out of the number of hard drives you have.
Sure.
So, if your choice is to create, if you have like 10 drives, you can create a 10-disk RAID Z2, or you could create 2 5-disk RAID Z1s. And the 2 groups of 5 instead of 1 group of 10, the 2 groups of 5 will be faster. Because you don't end up getting stuck waiting for one of the drives if it's a little slower or whatever. And then as for the power of 2 performance thing, so when ZFS writes out to the disk, it takes its record size, which is normally 128 kilobytes, and then divides that up across the drives. So if the number of non-redundant drives, the number of drives it has to divide the actual data up across, is a power of 2, then it divides 128 evenly. Right? If you're dividing, 128 into 4, then that's 32 kilobytes on each of the 4 drives. But if you're dividing it by 5, that doesn't divide evenly, right? You get a fraction. So what it'll do is it'll use a smaller block size and write to 4 drives, and then maybe 2 of those drives will get 2 more blocks, and the other 2 drives won't. And so you end up waiting, not using as you're waiting for that write to finish before you do the next one. And it'll, vary which drives get the extra blocks so that the drives fill up evenly. But it'll mean that when you're writing, you're not doing it across the whole set of drives because some of the drives have to do twice as much work. And so you end up waiting more often. If you can do a setup where the number of data drives is a power of 2, so 2, 4, or 8, you'll get better performance. So that means if it's Z1, you would need the power of 2 number of drives plus 1 for redundancy, or Z2 is 2, or Z3 is 3. But yeah, if you want the very best performance, your best bet is to use mirrors. So you do pairs of disks, and you do a bunch of completely separate pairs, and then ZFS will work across all of them at once, and that'll be the fastest. The downside to that is you're paying for every byte you write has to be on 2 drives. So you end up paying, you have to buy twice as many drives, right?
Sure.
Whereas, so say each drive's 1 terabyte and you need 8 terabytes of space. Well, that would require buying 16 drives if you're going to do mirroring.
Yeah.
Whereas if you do RAID Z2, then all you need is 10 drives instead of 16 drives. It might not be quite as fast, but obviously it's a lot cheaper. And so it's all about trading off price and performance.
Yep.
Anything else is Oracle recommended a limit of 9 disks per drive, and I talked about using 10 or 11. There's a penalty for that, and it's just, again, it's a matter of price versus performance. When I was building our new server, we had the choice of either doing 3 sets of 10 in Z2 or 6 sets of 6 in Z2. Both would give us 96 terabytes of usable storage, but one would take 6 more hard drives that are $400 a piece. That's $2,400. I'd rather be a tiny bit slower than me being $2,400 poorer. So, again, that works like that. And he says he's also interested in the context of when you have higher numbers of drives, having the power of 2 drives would impact performance. 3-disk RAID Z grouping is basically max out a gigabit connection. He assumes that the performance with a bunch of these would be even faster. So the bottlenecks, it depends on a lot of things. Some of it is NFS, but I easily maxed out 2 gigabits off ZFS, but I've never actually had 10 gigabit networking before. But soon we hope to have that. Yes, I just got a 4 1 gigabit port card for my file server, and I'm actually going to see. I expect to be able to saturate 4 gigabits out of it without a problem.
Oh, cool.
Just doing regular benchmarks like reading a file off the disk with ZFS. My array, which is 6 3 terabyte desktop drives. This is my array at home. That one can do 700 to 750 megabytes a second of read. That's like a 16 gigabyte file. So it just, my big swaths, and it's just pulling like 150, 160 megabytes a second off each of the 6 disks. And so I get insane performance.
Yeah, that's cool.
And so, that would be about half of a 10 gigabit network card, right? 700 megabits a second, or 700 megabytes a second would be 5.6 gigabits per second.
Okay.
So 750 would
sounds
be,
like you won't have any trouble saturating that other new system.
So if you can with 6 disks in Z2, you can get 6 gigabits per second, and that'll keep the network card plenty busy. So if you have a bigger one, you might not quite get as much performance. But if you were to do, say, 2 Z2s of 6 disks, then with that, I would expect you'd be able to max out a 10 gigabit network card.
Oh, sweet.
Although, various things go into effect there. You can get more performance out of disks if you have compression, like if your data is compressible, because when you're reading and writing compressed data, you compress it and then you write it, you're only writing the compressed amount of data, but logically, you're writing the uncompressed amount of data. So, if it's all zeros, you can compress, a gigabyte a second to fit on a USB stick that can only write 40 megabytes a second because you're compressing it to so much less. But also means when you read it back as fast as the disk can, and then you decompress it, and all of a sudden you have a speed that's faster than the disk could actually have ever read.
Does ZFS on FreeBSD do multi-core decompression, so it's not locked to one CPU core?
If you're reading more than one file, I think it does. But if you're reading just one file, I think it only one. I'm not sure.
Okay, just one.
I'm not sure. But, most times in your workload, you're going to be using more than one file. So I think then you would get the performance.
Then it'll take advantage. And I know they recommended like LZ4 compression, which came in with 9.2 and 10.
Yes.
They recommend just keeping that on all the time because the overhead's really low, but then you save so much time on the writes and reads.
A system called early abort where it tries to compress the file, and if in the first couple of milliseconds, if the compression ratio is less than 12.5%, So if the amount of space, the shrinkage is less than 12%, it'll give up trying to compress it and just write it uncompressed.
Oh, that's
so
good.
that it won't
can detect like previously compressed
Yeah,
data.
so if you're writing, an MP3 file that's already compressed and isn't compressible, it's not going to waste a bunch of time trying to compress it.
That's actually
read
really cool.
Look at the first couple seconds, be like, oh, this is a compressed file I can't compress anymore, so I'll just not waste the CPU time trying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually really, really handy. That's cool. So I hope he answered your question.
Yeah.
So next up, we have a question from Alan, who's asking about FreeBSD jail mounts.
You skipped one. Yes.
Oh, did I skip
questions
one?
from James.
Oh.
Questions from a Linux admin.
We'll go back to James here in a second. So I got Alan up on my screen here. But Alan's asking he'd like to be able to mount ZFS data systems from his host inside of a jail, and he's having issues with this, hoping that we can help. So looks like he's wanting to run a Plex server inside a jail, needs to separate it from the host system since it's internet facing. That makes sense. The ZFS data set needs to be accessible from the host or for home use, and from the inside the jail for outside use. All of his research has led him to nullfs mounts, but when he mounts them inside the jail, he gets the directories but none of the contents. So any suggestions?
That's weird.
So I guess where I would start with... Yeah, I use nullfs all the time. So I think what I think he's doing here is he said he mounts them inside the jail.
In
other words, if you're mounting them inside the jail, I mean, obviously you can't break out and mount something that's outside. So typically when you do nullfs mounts, you'll do that on the host outside the jail, and the jail system has support for this. EasyJail, I believe, does. Orden does. There's a bunch of utilities that'll do it. But you'll mount the nullfs ahead of time, usually before you even start the jail, or you can do it after, doesn't matter. But once you mount it from the outside, it should just work. I use them all the time here too. Yeah. So I think that would be, if I'm reading what you're saying correctly here, that sounds like where the problem is. You just got to do it ahead of time on the host side.
If you're doing EasyJail, there's a file etc/fstab dot and then the jail name, and you can add lines in there, and it'll mount them every time it starts the jail. So what nullfs mount will normally look like is on the host systems, you'll do mount -t nullfs, then the path of the original file, and then something like user/jails/jailname/ and then the directory you want it to be inside the jail, and then it'll appear there. The other option is you can actually jail a ZFS dataset. So you can basically have ZFS assign it to a specific jail number, and then inside that jail, the ZFS commands will actually let you manipulate that data set. So you'll actually be able to do things like even take a snapshot of the data set inside the jail. So it basically makes root in the jail allowed. It's basically delegating control over that data set to root in the jail.
You virtualized essentially more of the jail. I mean, you have access to your own disk essentially.
Yeah. The issue with that is once you do that, that data set is no longer available on the host machine. Because you're letting root in the jail do things like change the mount point, root in the jail might say change the mount point to /etc and make a fake password file. And then if you were mounting that on the host, all of a sudden the guy from the jail would know your root password and you wouldn't, and that would be bad. Yeah. So it doesn't allow that. So if you only need it in the jail, you can actually do ZFS jail, and then you also have to set the ZFS set jailed equals on the data set, and then that data set will be completely controlled by that jail. Or the easy one is the nullfs mount, because it also means that the host system still has access to the files, and that's what I do for all of them.
Still administrated outside.
Yeah. Or the third option is actually you can just do ZFS set mount point equals user jail name Plex or something, and have the mount point on the host system actually just be the directory in the jail.
Well, I think he wants it accessible outside.
Well, it would still be accessible outside. You just have to go to the jail directory to find it.
Yeah.
Depending on what you're doing, it might make sense to do that. That's what I do when I have specific data sets that belong in a jail. Like when I have a MySQL server in a jail, I create a separate data set for the database directory because I wanted to have a different record size than the rest of the jail. And again, I'm using EasyJail, so all of my jails have their own ZFS data set to start with.
Okay, well, I hope we answered your question there, Alan. So next up, we'll go back to James then, I guess. Here, Alan.
He says, a question from a Linux admin. He says, thanks for the great show. I listen all the time, driving to and from work and so on. He says he has a long background as a Linux administrator. In one way or another, he's been using Unix or Linux for a long time. He said he tried BSD a bit in the 2000s, particularly OpenBSD. He enjoyed playing around with it. It just didn't seem to ever catch on at work. He says during his 15 years of experience, he's never actually come across a BSD machine running anywhere, like in a business or production setting. Part of that could just be, it depends what industry you work in. And part of it is, that little server in the corner that nobody ever looks at that just works.
Yeah.
People don't go and look at it.
You don't get called.
Yeah. Yes. The BSD servers have the highest mean time between loss of sleep. Right? You don't get alerted by them very often. But anyway, he says doing his contracting consulting work, he doesn't come across it very often. Part of that might just be people that are using BSD servers don't necessarily need consultants as often. But anyway, he says throughout the years he's often gone back and enjoyed working with OpenBSD. And every now and again, when he gets frustrated with the Linux system, he's like, why can't it just be BSD? Sorry, it's a very long email.
A very long email, yes.
But what he likes is in BSD there's a very clear definition of what the OS is. Linux doesn't mean anything, right? It's a kernel, and then I use land from over here, and then packages from over here, and bundled with some stuff. But when you say I run OpenBSD, that means you have an OpenBSD kernel with an OpenBSD userland and all the OpenBSD goodness.
Config files are all in a consistent place. Yes.
And obviously documentation. The man pages on BSD are done very nicely. Especially like OpenBSD, there's rules. Your new command or feature doesn't go in until there's a man page for it. Yeah, the man page has to come first. Whereas, in Linux, oftentimes it's like, I'll get around to writing a man page for it eventually.
Yeah. And he wanders off, and 3 years later, okay, no man page for that. Sorry.
Yeah. And it's easier to keep them up to date, and you don't have to deal with things like EPEL or whatever for Red Hat to make sure that you're not getting ancient software. And obviously the ease of administration and so on. So anyway, his biggest question has been, why is no one using BSD? And why has he never seen a BSD installation at work? Especially, oftentimes now businesses are all like, oh, Linux is the solution. It's oftentimes just because they don't know that BSD is even an option. And that's what we're trying to change.
Yes. I think, like you said, Alan, though, it depends really on his industry where you're at, because he said he's in Europe. But, there's a lot of BSD users and developers in Europe, so it just might really depend on the circles you're running in.
And what business you're in and so on. Because, if you deal with firewalls on a regular basis and you've never heard of BSD, I fear for your clients. But, if you mostly deal with Windows servers, then obviously, you're not going to hear BSD very often. But now with things like ZFS, even a lot of Windows shops have a free NAS box in the corner nowadays.
Yep, to back it all up and have the big data store off of a Windows box.
Yep.
Okay.
Sure, Chris gets a short email.
Yeah, I'll get the short email. Okay, from Chess. So he wants to email us, let us know we're doing a great job with the BSD Now show. The news, interviews, tutorials have all been excellent. I think I've learned something from each episode. There can never be enough BSD podcasts, so please keep up the great work. Well, thanks, Jess. We will keep on doing it, and we're glad you're enjoying the show. So tell all your friends. Right?
Yes.
But that was an easy one.
Well, look at the next one. It's only like 25 lines.
Right.
So he says, Frank here, he says he wrote in last time asking for tips on convincing management to authorize migration to FreeBSD because they've been... they had switched some of their virtual machines over to it, and they were getting like a 30% performance increase over their CentOS.
Sure.
So he came back with 2 pieces of feedback. The first is about how stupid upper management is, and the second is about a nice trick when getting audited for their certificate authority software. So they tried the steps that the guide we had linked to mentioned, but none of them seemed to really work. We have really stupid business type managers, which think the cloud is something new, not just rebranding of things that we've always done. So he says, so what they did was they bribed them. He said he had a few of his friends that are also intelligent business types, and work at a bank or things like that. And they got, but they do speak the language of the managers, and rather than the sysadmins don't really speak manager. So they got some of his business type friends involved, some LinkedIn magic, a couple visits, have lunch with some people, and they basically convinced them that BSD stuff is actually saving their business and is a good thing. So sometimes it's just about being able to speak the right language to convince people that it's a good idea.
Sure.
Because some people, if they don't understand it, it's a bad idea. But if you can explain it right, then it's a good idea.
Well, in my mind, a lot of these business guys are bottom line kind of guys. Okay, you save this much money when you switch.
It's like,
okay, that sounds.
We can
like
now
a
do
good
this
idea.
with 30% fewer servers. That's a big bottom line.
Like, if you can draw it down to a bottom line and say we save this much cash per year, like that's a big deal. And then if you say we're not losing any functionality, or look, the license is smaller. Our lawyer said they don't have to review this.
We don't need as many lawyers as many.
Yeah, we don't need to pay all these lawyers anymore, right? It's easier. So hopefully, hopefully some of your management would understand those arguments.
Well, he said, weirdly enough, a bunch of random guys in suits speaking business talk was more convincing to management than the sysadmin's presentation with, statistics and graphs and stuff. Because in the end, sometimes it's about convincing a person, not,
Sure.
Sysadmins think a different way, it's like graphs and numbers and proof, and that's what convinces us. But business types, it's not always that way. So anyway, it says with that obstacle out of the way, we have now fully migrated all of the Red Hat Enterprise Linux 5 servers to FreeBSD.
Very cool.
All their web servers running their own jails. They have TLS 1.2. No more messing around with recompiling stuff. And it's all set up. And
and all the config files are in the same location, he says too. Darn, how convenient is that?
He says he's still enjoying the show very much and looking forward to our installation guide episode, which we just have to figure out how to do.
Sure.
It's complicated by the fact that our desktop presenter software doesn't like to capture a VirtualBox. So anyway, he says in the past few weeks, he did almost the same as I did about talking about it on the show, installing a basic FreeBSD, install Puppet, and let the magic happen.
Oh, very cool.
Yes. So thank you, Frank, for writing it.
Well, that's a success story, then a great question actually to end on. So that's actually going to wrap up the show for this week, guys. So again, after the show, we're going to be posting a very extensive written version of today's tutorials. There's going to be a lot of extras in there we didn't have time to mention on the air, so please go ahead and take a look at that at bsdnow.tv. There's going to be sections in there about setting up router to tunnel all or parts of your traffic on VPN or Tor, how to make the router check for updates, email them to you, et cetera, et cetera. So again, a lot of good nuggets in that document there you may want to take a look at. And also, as usual, send your questions, comments, show ideas, topics, etc. to feedback@bsdnow.tv. If you know somebody we should interview or ask to do an interview, maybe send that in. We'll see if we can line them up.
Or you can help us convince someone to give an interview. Or
Yeah. Sometimes it's the convincing. Oh, I don't have Skype. I don't have a webcam.
Or
but
nobody cares to hear what I have to say, or my English isn't good enough.
Yeah, most of these people are really shy.
Yes.
We're computer users, right? So if you can push someone to do a tutorial that you think has something interesting that we'll all want to hear, definitely shoot us that email and let us know. As usual, we don't check the YouTube comments, JV comments, Reddit. So if you want us to see it, please send it via email, or you can send it via Twitter. We do try and monitor that as well. And as usual, you can watch live Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1900 UTC. Yep. So thank you guys for joining us today. Really appreciate having you here. And anything else you want to add, Alan?
No, I think that's it. See you guys next week.
Well, we will see you guys all next week. Have a good week, guys.